Hello and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Brian Henning. I'm the director of the Gonzaga Institute for Climate, Water, and the Environment, or Climate Institute. I'm a professor of philosophy and environmental studies and sciences here at Gonzaga. It's my pleasure to be hosting this most recent installment of our For Our Common Home lecture series. We host around 12 events a year, and this is the second to last one. Our last will be on Earth Day, a week from today, in this room. On graduating in the age of climate crisis. I'll be presenting a little bit, but along with our program managers, Carly Hohnbein and Dante Jester. It's the 4th anniversary of the founding of the Climate Institute, and so it'll be also a celebration. There'll be some desserts and other things to encourage you to come and enjoy celebrating the work that's been done over the last 4 years. As you might imagine, doing this is not free, and not only do these events benefit the community, but even more important, we're also taking our Jesuit mission into the community and benefiting them through climate literacy education and climate resilience planning and action. And so if you have the means to support our work, we always really appreciate that. As you know, we're here today to talk about fossil fuel divestment. And so our speaker will share quite a bit about that, but I thought it'd be useful to set a little bit of context in case you're not expert about it. So divestment is the opposite of investment. So when you invest in something, you're taking money and putting in stocks or bonds or other assets. And the divestment is when you elect to not do that into certain categories. So you might choose not to invest in weapons manufacturers or in some nuclear weapons or something else that you feel strongly about. Tonight we're talking about the idea of divesting from fossil fuels in particular. The topic has quite a long history at Gonzaga. It's something that the students in particular have been focused on for quite a long time. The first time I could find it was in the 80s, which I was alive for, but not here. The topic then was apartheid South Africa and trying to divest from companies that were doing business in South Africa. And so Gonzaga students tried to persuade the university to stop investing in companies that did business there in order to protest what they considered a racist regime. And you can find a lot of interesting coverage in the school paper about this topic at a certain point. So the campaign lasted 4 years before it was successful. Along the way, the university offered to just sponsor a few scholarships for students from South Africa, and the students thought that was great, but maybe not sufficient, and so escalated their protests, setting up at one point a shanty town on the Quad, which is interesting approach, but quite a bit of attention. And eventually, from the coverage in the paper, the university elected to stop directly investing in South Africa, companies doing business in South Africa. More contemporarily, the movement that students have been advocating for to divest our endowment from fossil fuels is started in 2015. And I guess when I was mentioning divestment, I forgot to mention the other sort of wonky important thing that we'll be talking about is this idea of an endowment. Which maybe you hear quite a bit about on the news, but it's basically a big savings account, if I can really probably grossly oversimplify and slightly misrepresent what it is. But people believe in the university, and then we pool those resources and take parts of it and invest it with the hope of bringing in returns that help the university to pay for scholarships and buildings, and so that we don't have to raise tuition as much. And so endowments are an important way that universities fund their activities, including Gonzaga. Compared to most universities, we have a relatively small endowment, but not insignificant. And so this is about whether or not the universities should elect to stop investing its endowment in certain things like fossil fuel companies whose primary business is the extraction of coal, oil, and gas out of the ground, and then the attempt to sell it for profit. The students started this in 2015, and it's really remarkable to me that a student campaign has been going on for 10 years. So some of you in the audience who are students, how old were you in 2015? Anybody? 10? So, so it's been going on for a minute, and you all have a way of like graduating and going off into the world, which is rude. So you can imagine it's really challenging to have students take up this task and then pass it on generation to generation. So that we're talking about, on the 4th or 5th generation of students at least who have been advocating for this campaign. And in the middle of that, you might also recall there was a pandemic, which made it really challenging. So it's impressive that the students have been advocating all this time. This was something the Gonzaga Student Body Association voted on and approved in 2017. The faculty then voted as well in support of this resolution, and the staff voted in a way in support of this in a way as well, all around the same time, 2017, 18, and leading up to that. So it's been going on for quite a long time. This was a slide from 2017 also about what the students were advocating for and what they were not advocating for. So I'll give you a second to digest this. But so what Fossil-Free Gonzaga was advocating for in 2017 was asking the university to not invest in the 200 most intensive coal and oil companies. So the people who own the carbon in the ground, not so much people who use fossil fuels, which is pretty much everybody, ourselves included, but rather the people who own the hydrocarbons in the ground, and then asking the university to transition away from those investments responsibly over time, and to do that in a way that was meaningful and transparent. And the university has done quite a few things, including evaluating our exposure to fossil fuels in our endowment, looking at considering whether or not the people we hire to help invest the money have a good record on this and how they consider that in their investments. But in the end, after making a few changes, including starting to take some of our resources and do what's called impact investing or positively investing in certain things in a small amount, the university's board of trustees, who ultimately have responsibility for investing our endowment, chose not to divest at this time. And so since then, the students have just continued to advocate for the value of doing so. Two quick thoughts on common arguments that are presented on the idea of divestment before I introduce our speaker. One is that it's just an empty symbol, and this is an interesting one to me as a philosopher. I'm curious about the idea of the phrase empty symbol. First, I would note that symbols can be really potent or not. So the cross is a symbol. The American flag is a symbol. Lots of people fight and die, because they believe in particular symbols. So the question is not whether it's symbolic, but whether or not it's a potent symbol or not. Is it have any significance to it? And that depends on us. A second comment regarding this is that they would point out that it's not likely that we would starve fossil fuel companies of resources through this technique, that we're not likely to make it so that we could financially harm ExxonMobil and make them change their business. And that's an interesting argument. It may be true. Let's just say it's true. I'm not sure if it's true. There's maybe you could get to a point if there were enough people doing it that it would cause financial harm. But let's just accept the premise that it's not. Part of what people advocate for divestment say is that that symbols, that what the goal is and was, let's say with South Africa, was to remove what is called the social license, the credibility of what we're talking about, to try and say, as a society, this is not something we believe in and want to support. And so it's attempting to remove social license from, in this case, companies who want to extract fossil fuels for financial benefit. And then third, in terms of the idea of whether or not it's an empty symbol or not really depends on whether or not we think that it could solve the problem by itself. And I think people who advocate for divestment would probably, most of them agree that this by itself isn't going to sort of fix the climate crisis. That if everybody divested, that probably wouldn't get us to where we need to be. But rather, is this something that's important enough to us as either individuals, and how, if you have a retirement account, how you invest for your own retirement, or as an institution, we have what's called an ESG policy, environment, social, and governance policy for investing our endowment. And we say that if something is important enough to us, we can elect to not invest in certain things. And so as I take it, the students are of the view that this is significant enough that it merits us not investing in certain kinds of things. The other main concern, very reasonably, is that what if, when we stop investing in fossil fuels, it would harm the endowment, and that would harm our ability to educate students for the common good, and that would be a problem if we had to raise tuition more quickly. We already sometimes have to do that more than we would like. And so a lot of activity and fight is over this. 10 years ago, this was more of a theoretical question, meaning that a lot of institutions hadn't yet done it. Since then, many hundreds of institutions, including higher ed institutions, have done so and don't seem to be suffering significant financial implications from doing that. And so it's still something that thoughtful and reasonable people will disagree about. I would take it, and not that I speak on behalf of the students, but I think their view, or the view of the idea of divestment, would be finding a responsible way forward on an appropriate time scale, agreeing to the idea and figuring out how to do it responsibly would be the goal. And that if we became persuaded that it was impossible to do it responsibly, meaning without bringing significant material harm to the university, then perhaps that would be a good reason not to do it. But given that every other institution who's committed to it has figured it out, there's reason for optimism that that's possible. When Gonzaga puts its mind to it, we seem to be pretty creative in figuring out an appropriate way to do it consistent with our mission. So in the end, that's a sort of a high-level overview. And then we were interested in thinking not just about this as something that's been going on for a decade at Gonzaga, but I was looking for a speaker who might be able to help us to connect this to our mission in particular as a Catholic Jesuit humanistic institution. How should a Catholic institution in particular think about this right now? And so we found a really excellent speaker. Her name is Anna Johnson, and she's the North American Senior Programs Manager for the Laudato Si movement, or LSM. For those of you who don't speak fluent Catholic, Laudato Si is a document that Pope Francis wrote in 2015, just before the Paris Climate Agreement, that speaks to the Catholic views on both the poor and our, what he calls our common home, Earth, and trying to figure out ways to hear both the cries of the poor and the cries of the Earth together in what he calls an integral ecology in this beautiful document, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. The Laudato Si movement, or LSM, is a spirit-led movement that builds, inspires, and mobilizes a global community of Catholics to care for our common home and achieve climate and ecological justice in collaboration with all people of goodwill. Prior to joining the Laudato Si movement, Anna worked for over a decade in Catholic social teaching and global solidarity curriculum design and leadership training, particularly with youth and young adults, witnessing and experiencing how the climate crisis exacerbates all injustice, both globally and locally, and that drove her focus towards ecological justice. She has a bachelor's in peace studies and political science from the University of Notre Dame and an executive master's in sustainability leadership from Arizona State University. Please join me in welcoming Anna Johnson.
Well, it is truly my honor to be with you all this evening. Thank you so much for this invitation, Dr. Henning, and the Institute. It is, I watch these recordings on live stream, and so when I got the invitation, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. So, and I've been following along with the divestment work that the university club has been doing for so long and tirelessly, and just the continued engagement with it. And so to be standing here with you all today is just, it's a gift. Thank you. We know that we are only saved together. Pope Francis says no one is saved alone, is his way of saying it. And so with that in mind, and particularly when it comes to things like finances and futures and things like that, we got to get to know each other. We got to get to be in relationship with each other. So rather than me starting off, I'd like you to start off and introduce yourself to someone sitting next to you who you did not come with, and share briefly what inspired you to come tonight. So turn to somebody who you did not come with, introduce yourself, and say, why did you come tonight? All right, take 30 seconds to finish up. All right, are there a couple of brave souls who might be willing to share? Why'd you come tonight? Yes.
So I wanted to come and listen to some folks who are willing to talk about divesting. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So glad you are here. Great to have you here. Maybe one more? Yes. Oh, wait, do you want the microphone? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Richard. I'm currently studying electrical. I'm here because I'm currently studying electrical engineering, but in the future I want to work in the energy industry, so like utility scale power production. But as I specifically want to be working in clean energy, so like anything that isn't like fossil fuels or even emitting any CO2 into the atmosphere. So I want to get into that sector.
You've got the whole spectrum just across this one aisle here. I love it. This is amazing. Well, thank you all again for coming, and I hope that you've all had a chance to at least get to know the person next to you, knowing that no single one of us holds all of the answers around this. And so it's going to take all of us bringing our skills, our passions, our communities with us to get towards this answer. There is a term in nonviolence called the 200-year present. Has anyone heard of this before? So the idea is, it's coined by a sociologist, poet, mother, and influential peace researcher named Elise Boulding. And this is a call to think in this present moment, we stand at the crux of 200 years. Most of the oldest people alive right now are about 100 years old, and that maybe the youngest are about to be 100, like will live to be 100. So we're standing at the moment where there are people alive that hold a 200-year spectrum. The Meta Center for Nonviolence says, quote, "It describes a way of thinking of the fleeting present moment with full awareness of the effects of past actions and of our present actions on the future. This perspective encourages a long-term commitment to all life in which we acknowledge that the past is still with us in its effects and that all aspects of the present moment, all of our thoughts and actions, will determine the future." There's a lot of chaos happening in our world right now and in our country right now. And it's really easy to get sucked into the scarcity of the current chaos in the current moment. I don't at all mean to downplay how scary certain parts of this current moment are. And I also want to invite us, for this evening at least, to zoom out and place ourselves right in this moment at the crux of this history and this future as we talk about this issue. one in which we have all the tools and resources of the legacy that has been given to us and all of the hope and courage that it will take to build upon our society such that we will be giving the youngest among us the best future they might have. While we all sit at the crux of this moment, this term is particularly poignant to me right now. In a little more than a week, my grandfather will turn 100. And in a few weeks, for a brief moment, I will be holding the youngest human on the face of the planet until the next person gives birth. So I invite you to think of who are these people for you in your life that are the people that are sort of your 100-year past and your 100-year future. There are some questions that will lead through this that we'll think about as we walk through this time together. What have we been given? How can we take the best of that? There's been so much that is built upon to give us where we are today. What does our mission look like in today's expression of it? What do we want to leave behind? What steps can we take now to do our best that we are ensuring that kind of legacy? Pope Francis holds a 200-year vision, or perhaps even longer as well. In Laudato Si, the document that Dr. Henning spoke about, he wrote, this brings us to ask these questions. What is the purpose of our life in the world? Why are we here? What is the goal of all of our work and our efforts? And what need does the earth have of us? When we gaze with this 200-year perspective present, we can see more clearly. We do the best with what we can now, and then we may have to adjust. For example, my grandfather, who's turning 100 soon, is one of the absolute best humans I know. His kindness knows no bounds. His wit is dry and hilarious as he seeks to make everyone he meets smile, at the very least. That's his goal of most interactions. His faith is deep, and I hope that I'm half the person that he is when I hopefully reach elder status myself. His career was spent working for Mobil Oil. After growing up in the Great Depression and fighting in the war, he saw how oil was helping people get access to life-saving technologies and resources which were not previously possible, whether through personal vehicles or through the invention of plastics, which helped keep people alive and get functioning back, such as through prosthetics, hearing aids, and cardiac support, and helps keep food fresher for longer, allowing for feasible ways to address world hunger. And yet, we also know now more about the repercussions of oil with driving climate change. That doesn't mean it didn't also do good, right? We know that things are complicated. It's not always black and white. And so as I sit holding the future 100 years literally very close to my heart, if we continue to invest in fossil fuels the way we have been, we are actually condemning this child to horrific future consequences. Certainly consequences that my grandfather would never wish upon his great-grandson or granddaughter. We do the best with what we have until we know better, and then we do better. So now I invite you to take a moment. Who's the oldest person that you know who's lived through the most history in the last 100 years who's given this to you? And who's the youngest person you know who has the potential to hold the most years in front of themselves? And I invite you to share those names with the person next to you. Because again, we are not saved alone. So what are the names of these two people that are coming to mind for you? All right, take another 30 seconds, finish up. And again, we know that we come here surrounded by people on either end of us. And so when we show up in this space, we're not showing up alone. We're showing up with these people who help inform us in this long view. We're going to look at these questions, particularly in light of divestment, on three main areas where divestment particularly plays a role. Dr. Henning spoke to some of them already, so we can speed through some of those a little bit faster, which is great. We'll be talking about impact, the impact of divestment, the financial implications of divestment, and then spend a fair amount of time on the mission and moral call to divestment. As I start, I will also name that as a white woman born in this country, that my 100-year history, of course, has some deep challenges with it, and also has some amazing gifts that have been given to me, including being aware that my family and myself have benefited from the fossil fuel industry. And so without clearly looking at both, the challenges and the gifts, we're not able to see clearly our way forward. And so I wanted to name that for myself as well as our recognition when we come into this conversation. So before we dive into all of that, though, I'm going to do a quick overview of the science that is driving this call for a just transition away from fossil fuels and what divestment is. So I know you all are here on a what is it, a Tuesday night? Like you're clearly well versed in a lot of this. So we'll just give a brief overview of where this science is. So this is what we call the carbon bubble. These are the proven fossil fuel reserves that we could extract and burn. This is how much fossil fuels we know is still out there that we could get. However, this is the remaining carbon budget. So this is the maximum amount of fuel that we can burn to remain below the 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming that was committed to in the Paris Accords. This means we have a lot more fossil fuels left than we can extract and burn to have a sustainable future. While I know that perhaps those of you who have been following 1.5 degrees Celsius might feel like a moonshot at this point, a miracle, we also know that we can't argue with the scientists. They said that 1.5 is the threshold at which, quote, many of the deadliest effects of climate change are reduced. Now, for some context, 2024 was the first year that our average warming was above 1.5 degrees, just over. And we saw some pretty horrific implications of that. What are some climate disasters that happened last year? Anybody? Hurricanes, fires. Like crazy heat strokes, heat waves that were just burning up our crops. Immense cold fronts that were coming through, right? A lot of melting, a lot of things that we saw. Really scary ocean temperatures and ways that starts to change things, right? We all know we crossed 1.5 degrees and it was already scary. I don't want to commit us to more than 1.5 degrees. So hurricanes ramping from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in mere hours, faster than we'd ever seen before. Heat waves scorching our crops and people. Flooding, displacing millions of people each year. Forest fires ripping through our beloved land at increasing heat and speed. And that was just in the US, which is one of the more protected places. This is a picture I took. I live in Seattle, so as I was flying home, and it was just on the western part of Montana last year. So I'm sure that Spokane got the smoke because I know we did in Seattle as well. My colleagues in the Philippines faced 4 huge typhoons in a mere 10 days, which is just a horrific battering of the people already not yet rebuilt from the previous typhoon seasons. This is a picture from one of my colleagues of his church. So you can see what the flooding did within his church and 2 commutes home. I want to make a quick side note, right? Just because we crossed the threshold of 1.5 doesn't mean we can't go back. Just because it's been broken, that refers to a long-term average over decades, but it does bring us nearer to doing so as fossil fuel emissions continue to heat the atmosphere. So don't think, what is she talking about? All hope's been lost, we already crossed it. It's not a line you can't go back over. So it terrifies me to think of what committing to a greater than 1.5 degree world would look like, and so I refuse to do so. It would be condemning of this baby and of our sisters and brothers around the world to a lifestyle of survival in the face of massive unpredictability and destabilization, and I'm not willing to do that. Okay, so with that side note complete, we have more fossil fuels left than we can extract and burn to have a livable future. It's almost like if you're watching your blood sugar levels and you know you can only have one piece of chocolate, but there's a whole stack of chocolate in front of you, making sure that we can commit to having just one piece of chocolate. Pope Francis named this in Laudato Si, and he said, "We know that technology based on the use of highly polluting fossil fuels needs to be progressively replaced without delay. We need to be reacting in a way commensurate with the urgency of the challenges facing the world." We don't have the ecological time to continue to invest in fossil fuels, and it's destroying our home, our common home, the planet. So, divestment, Dr. Henning walked us through really quickly what it is, so I will just move through this really quickly. There's our endowment and investments is where we put money and support into different industries. The one we're talking about today, of course, is the fossil fuel industries. So when we look at our asset portfolio and we remove the items that are funding that which we are divesting from. Pretty simple, right? So in terms of fossil fuels, there's a few ways to do this. One that we talked about is the Carbon Underground 200, or the 200 largest coal, oil, and gas producers, and removing them from the portfolio that we follow for this. And so I know you all were listening really closely to Dr. Henning. What are sort of the ways that divestment can create change? Absolutely, perfect, right? It removes the social license. Thank you, well done. Applause, everyone. And then the financial piece too, right? And we'll talk a little bit about what the financial piece has to play on it or not. So universities, for instance, other institutions who are working to build and equip the future may, knowingly or not, support fossil fuels through this investment or partnerships. So why would we focus on divestment, right? Laudato Si movement is a global movement. We're active in over 140 countries around the world. Why are we focusing on divestment? Because when we're looking at what sort of impact we can make, it is among the most impactful. While my personal actions towards sustainability, of course, have an impact, right? I bring my water bottle with me and I try to reduce my travel. We also know that our personal actions will not bring us to a sustainable future. And so we have a unique opportunity, being in the global north, to help apply this moral license and pressure upon the situation of the world and help make the transformation needed. We know that the 71% of emissions were caused by the top 100 companies. Of course, they are catering to purchasing habits, but also if there were more renewable and energy efficient options that were more affordable and easier to purchase, I know I would be more inclined to do so, right? So, okay, thank you for sitting with this as well. So divestment, again, means removing asset classes associated with fossil fuels from one's asset portfolio. And so instead, universities and other institutions can use the money to invest in the success of companies that share the value of a livable future and are working towards solutions of our climate crisis. So let's talk about this and why, particularly as Catholics and as a Catholic institutions, we look at why we should divest from fossil fuels and invest in our future through the questions of impact, finance, and mission and morality. So if you look at what investment means, according to Merriam-Webster, we've got two words. One, to commit money in order to earn a financial return, and then two, to furnish with power or authority. So this again goes back to that piece of saying, what does our investments do? Is it does not just give finance, it also gives tacit approval and support to what they're doing. So I'm curious, how many of you have places that you'll no longer shop at, or that you've boycotted, or that you're not willing to frequent with your money? Right? So we do this on a personal level all the time. We're aware that we are voting with our dollars. And so this is another way that we're doing this. Oftentimes, there can be an argument against divestment by saying, if we're selling off our stocks, this then requires a buyer. This buyer might be even less ethically inclined than we are, and so they're likely to be even more committed to the financial success of this company. This isn't actually removing funding, so someone's going to be making money off of them. We're not actually impacting them in any way. However, we have such a unique ability to do this as a Catholic institution because there is still this power of authority in this morality space. So, as Dr. Henning spoke about, the best known example of divestment is from apartheid South Africa. And this campaign was underway for a while, and financial impacts were not immediately felt, but then eventually were. And the campaign itself allowed people and institutions to do two things: send a clear message to the administration, both in the United States and in South Africa, that they did not stand by what was happening, and they thought it was wrong. And two, it was a creative way for people to discern how to vote with their dollars and uphold their own dignity and morality while being aware of how we spent our money. And eventually this was impactful and played an important role in ending apartheid. We know that this is also in line with church teaching and practice, right? So as we look at our faith being people and an institution that is Catholic, we look towards the Gospels, we look towards our Bible, and we look towards the teaching of our church. As we look at what Jesus did during his lifetime, he always would walk with those who were on the margins, who were suffering the most impacts from the systems and structures that were in place and suffering the most harm from them. And so the church continues to work to live out that way in the perhaps increasingly complex world that we live in today, of saying, how are we making sure that we are creating a world in which God's love is most able to break free and reign upon the world? So the Vatican, Pope Francis, the Dicastery for Integral Human Development at the Vatican have all called for divestment. Worldwide, over 360 Catholic institutions representing dozens of billions of dollars have divested. And then here in the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops have created what's called the Socially Responsible Investment Guidelines, in which they said explicitly that they will consider divestment from those companies that consistently fail to initiate policies intended to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. A few examples of some of the places that have done this. One is, of course, Creighton University. In early 2021, they committed to divesting within 10 years, and they say that their rationale is both moral and financial. The university president of the time said, "This modified policy signifies our strong commitment to sustainable investing and sustainability in general across the university. Fossil fuel investment can be, quote, accomplished without a negative impact on the strength and overall performance of our endowment, which greatly serves the mission of the institution." So as we spoke about, there's this complex, there's this great way that these are tied together, right? They're not independent of each other, but they're very closely connected. Just last week, I was speaking with a prospective student, someone who is graduating from high school, who said that she was discerning between two universities, and she was actively researching what the university's investment stance was on fossil fuels, and that was part of her deciding where she was going to go. More recently, he has spoken about the morality of this as well, Father Hendrickson. In the Catholic tradition, hope is not passive wishing. So he speaks about how the action towards divestment was a place of hope. Hope is a virtue that catalyzes bold and local systemic action to advance love, justice, peace, and sustainability, what Christians call the kingdom of God. As a virtue, hope must be informed by other virtues, especially prudence as a right reason applied to action. Faced with modern ecological degradation and the climate crisis, Hope requires action guided by the best available science. So again, we can't think of our faith as being separated from the science or the way that we're using our finances, but rather intimately intertwined. There are a few other examples. The Institute of Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea created this roadmap to responsible investing. The English-Canadian Jesuits also raised questions about province investments and have continued to explore this as they move towards divestment and full divestment, as they moved away from even just holding on to some of it, aware that it didn't seem like their emotions were making much movement within the industry. So if I can look up and forward with a 100-year view, I can start to understand that these particularities over buying and selling start to fade, and what happens is the building of a moral and ethical dimension of not continuing to invest in that which destroy our planet, which is destroying our future. I can very easily imagine a future in which this child asks me, even though people knew it was destroying God's creation, people and planet, why did people continue to give money and power to the fossil fuel industry? Particularly the Catholic Church, which claims to stand with those most impacted, which claims to be walking with Jesus in the light of the Gospels. So what does this mean for now? As we look with morality and seek a sense of trust in the industry, we see that unfortunately we can't really trust the industry, and the argument we used earlier to legitimate continuing to hold investment. Oh, here's another document that came out from the Vatican in 2022, talking about the process that they ask that people who are, the institutions who are looking towards divestment also follow, saying that if you want to engage with the fossil fuel companies, you can move towards vote, voice, and then exit as you seek towards divestment. I just love the side eye that Pope Francis is offering in this picture, so I had to include it. But this is when they pushed it out, and this document from the Vatican very clearly states a call towards divestment to serve planet and the common good. So how do we know that these institutions, that the fossil fuel companies are not going to get better, even with shareholder activism and shareholder resolution that has continued to move, and us being the investors in them? In 2024, Exxon sued shareholders trying to file a climate resolution and tried to make sure that they could get out of having to uphold those shareholder resolutions. BP and Shell are amongst many oil and gas companies that have abandoned their emissions targets and climate ambitions. In just February, BP said we're not seeking renewable sources of, they're not researching anymore into clean energy, they're just diving deep into fossil fuel extraction. So they are not upholding an interest in Paris Accords. Also, we know fossil fuel companies continue to lobby against climate action. In 2023, oil and gas companies sent almost 2,500 participants to COP28, the gathering of all international governments as they think about how to uphold things like the Paris Accords. And fewer than 1 in 10 of the businesses represented had lobbying that supported Paris-aligned climate policy. So if we don't think they're using their power to throw around to try to ensure that this can continue, we would be mistaken. This score kind of came out, you know, we all know Fs, and then now we have even a G, which goes beyond F, and even an H of, you know, we're really not, these companies are not doing well in upholding Paris goals. But some of the plans to increase oil and gas production by the end of the decade: Exxon 18%, ConocoPhillips 47%, Chevron 33% by 2027. So hopefully I've made it clear that continuing to invest in these companies is a choice of continuing to invest in continued extraction, which will continue to warm our planet and will ensure that we will not stick to this 1.5 degree warming. These companies don't have the common good in mind. They don't have preferential option for the poor in mind, and they don't have the best interest of humanity in mind. Even while they do have an incredible capacity to build a better world, their commitment to quarterly earnings over the long term and the bottom line are driving the Earth's destruction. So the question arises, why do we continue to support their work, both financially and with moral authority, as we spoke about? It doesn't seem like we're putting our money where our mouth is all the time. And so here I've got a quick video to talk about, for Pope Francis to speak a little bit about what, or Cardinal Czerny, excuse me, at the Vatican to speak about this.
Pope Francis has released his message for the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation, which will be observed on September 1st with the theme, Listen to the Voice of Creation. In his message, the Pope turns his focus to the COP27 climate conference to be held in Egypt in November, as well as the COP15 Biodiversity Summit in Canada in December, reiterating the Holy See's call for nations to take more ambitious steps in the fight against climate change.
The Holy See helps everyone to get to a better position, and I'm sure that's what we'll be doing at the COPs as well. But we don't go with a plan of an advocacy plan. So in that sense, it depends on what the priorities are at the meetings to see where we can be of help.
In presenting the Pope's message, Cardinal Michael Czerny discussed the significance of Catholic organizations divesting from fossil fuel corporations.
There's quite a lot of consensus for divesting, because divesting is not only let's say, a financial decision, a decision of, you might say, internal, but it is also a form of advocacy. We need facts. In other words, it's not enough to say we are investing because we want to play a role. We'd like to see what role is in fact being played and what results are there. Otherwise, in conscience, one should divest.
The World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation was originally inspired by the Orthodox Christian community and adopted by Pope Francis in 2015. In this year's message, he calls for nations to work towards 4 principles: biodiversity, conservationism, global solidarity, and supporting those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
So as Cardinal Czerny said there, as Catholics, we are not called to be partisan, of course. Jesus was not partisan. He spoke to everybody across the way. But we are called to be involved in the political process and in an awareness of the way in which our institutions, our finances, and our support, tacit approval as otherwise, continue to add to either the support and the flourishing of our earth and humanity, or to the destruction of it and impacts on those who are poorest and most vulnerable. All right, so now to move quickly into the financial piece, which Dr. Henning spoke about as well. It is a sound financial decision to divest. Investment managers are recognizing the increased risk of fossil fuel divestment, and that growing rejection of fossil fuels by world government means that fossil fuel assets will be stranded. Looking back through history, right? So if we look to our past 100 years, it made a lot of sense to invest in fossil fuels. It was having positive returns. It was something worth putting your money towards in terms of advancing human health and flourishing. And yes, sometimes it still does tend to have positive returns now, but there are strong projections that will not continue to be so. And we ask, at what cost? And in the future, these will be stranded assets. As climate change worsens, more and more people will be impacted by the results of the overuse and abuse of fossil fuels, right? We know this. We saw that just last year. How many more people are impacted by it? Our movement grew significantly in the state of Kentucky, in the state of Texas, right? In places where they were feeling the impacts of this, and they say something's not right. More and more people will begin abandoning their stocks in these companies, which are driving massive death tolls and the Earth's destruction, and there won't be anyone left to purchase them. It's sort of like, can you imagine owning stock in an asbestos company? Right? Even though it was killing people, while having much more adequate alternatives that don't cause harm. At some point, industries will go out. No one is manufacturing asbestos anymore. We will see this in the fossil fuel industry. And so for now, we've already seen that this is starting to shift. So New York State's pension fund divested, and they see that it's essential for protecting the fund's long-term value to divest. Multiple peer-reviewed journals have shown that does not negatively impact return, and it is in line with our fiduciary responsibility. The only slight debate, as Dr. Henning said, is whether it's neutral or positive based on the length of study and returns. And it has this powerful public impact, right? Our social impact is also can be done in a positive way, and particularly for young people. So the Diocese of San Diego was the first Catholic diocese in the United States to divest, and Cardinal McElroy, who was then there, who's now been moved to Washington, D.C., said that the diocese is, quote, fulfilling our fiduciary responsibility of getting a safe rate of return on these funds, clarifying, we haven't had any dips in return. We haven't had any problems that would say, okay, we should have zigged when we should have zagged. I like that, zags, okay. Thank you for laughing. Okay, anyway, so then this study came out in 2023 that looked at, I want to make sure I tell you the right number, 138 universities that have divested, and they found, quote, roughly 133% more endowment value is now associated with U.S. schools that have publicly divested from fossil fuels than with those that have explicitly rejected it. So it is a sound financial decision to do so. And again, Creighton committed to this, and they have said that they haven't seen any negative returns on it, that it was done for financial reasons. And a 2020 study of 4 universities found that there were not negative impacts on endowment, and that there was evidence that divestment improved the value. So again, strong financial returns, and that there's only positive returns both financially and morally, as well as giving that social capital. So ahead of one of the COPs, 5 dioceses in Scotland divested, and I'm going to let the bishop who led that speak a little bit about that.
I think it's going to get to the stage it will be an embarrassment for any Catholic institution that hasn't divested. This has gone from being a purely symbolic gesture to something much more than that. So I think because we're now advocating, and Pope Francis is advocating, as a complete change of life. We have to change our lifestyle. So we have to dig deep. It's just a small step is divestment. It's really a start, but we have to make that small step.
Okay, so hopefully I've made those 2 cases pretty clear about why it makes sense to divest. And thirdly, we're going to talk about the morality and the mission behind it, which perhaps is the most important to a Catholic institution and the Catholic institutions that we work with within Laudato Si movement. As we look into the past, anyone born 100 years ago was born into an already changing climate, but it wasn't as known and noticed, so it was relatively stable. By the time I was born, we were already past the safe level of 350 parts per million, and so I'm sure that there are other people in the audience as well who that is true for, which what scientists would name as sort of the safe threshold of atmospheric pollutants in the air, and they have only continued to get worse at an increasingly rapid rate. So if we are to be men and women for others, called to living lives of service and leadership for the common good, our understanding of what that looked like 100 years ago is quite different than what that looks like now, in light of this. So I just want to tell a quick story about how this has started to come out and becoming more aware of the impacts of this. When I graduated from my undergrad 14 years ago, I lived in Uganda for a few years, and I didn't know much about climate change. This is a country in East Africa. While I was there, I worked in an internally displaced persons camp, people who had been displaced due to a war in the northern part of the country, which was largely driven, found out later how it connects to the climate crisis, by reducing access to water for a peoples who were largely pastoral and would move their cows around. And so they were always seeking water Decreasing water resource access, of course, then increased violence, and they had to flee. Internally displaced peoples are similar to refugees, however, they haven't crossed an international boundary, so they aren't afforded the same rights as refugees. We worked on developing a child-friendly space. Here are just some of the kids that we worked with. A child-friendly space was a place for kids to just be kids, a place that they could go and sing and learn and laugh and be safe, in a place in the middle of a camp where there was a lot of trauma, historic trauma and violence that continued to perpetuate. The church donated the land and the building, and the land we were going to farm in order to have crops to both feed the children and to sell at the market to pay the teachers. So we planted in an equatorial country where the rains were consistent and always came at the same time, and guess what? The rains didn't come when they always had. And so we moved our grant money around, and then we planted again, and guess what happened this time? The rains fell so torrentially that it wiped away the topsoil and took the seeds with it. I didn't understand exactly what was happening, but as I was walking home one day, this was my journey home, as I was walking home one day, a little boy was walking up to me, and he passed me, and he looked at me, and I clearly don't look like I belong in Uganda. And he points at the sky and he says, "America!" And I was like, what is he talking about? And then I look up and there's an airplane flying overhead. My emissions, just from my flight to Uganda, were more than an average Ugandan had emitted in the previous 20 years. So many people around the world, when we talk about preferential option for the poor, this call of our faith, they have done so little to cause this crisis, and yet they are already suffering horrific consequences of it, much more than my family was back in the United States. The entire market was quite bare that season when it came to harvest, and food was not just more expensive like we're seeing here, it just wasn't there. So in Laudato Si, Pope Francis speaks about what he calls differentiated responsibilities, basically saying that not every person, not every country has the same responsibilities to action. The actions that I am called to do in the United States are quite different than the actions that my Ugandan friends are called to do, right? And perhaps because our impact has been greater, we are also called to greater courage in how we're called to respond to it. I realized that I could spend all of my time working for the common good, right? I was a Jesuit-educated high school and Catholic-educated person, very committed to the common good, and I could say that I was going to spend all my time working for the common good, but the climate crisis was going to outpace us. Anything that we were trying to get towards, we would get 3 steps back because of the impacts of this crisis. So as we look towards the future, if we continue on this path of giving fossil fuel companies the social license along with the funding to continue to exploit our earth, our common home that we share with people in Uganda and all around the world, then this will only continue to get worse. This calls us towards a sense of global solidarity in our actions, and this is a boldness. So, in East Africa, they are starting to work towards the East Africa crude oil pipeline and drilling for an East Africa crude oil pipeline. They're looking at that, and there's a Catholic-run campaign trying to stop the East Africa crude oil pipeline. And so then we said, okay, so if that's the case, then how are we raising our voices against this in the countries that are funding that exploration and against those banks that are funding that exploration as well, right? If we are living with a call towards preferential option for the poor and the common good. Another common argument against divestment that I just want to name here is that some people say, well, we can't stop investing in fossil fuels because the global north had so much time to use fossil fuels to get to the development state that we're at. And so we should allow that for the global south as well. Again, not looking at the science that we can't do that. The International Energy Agency set a pathway for reaching net zero emissions by 2050 while meeting the needs of societies around the world. And they said there is no need for investment in new fossil fuel supply in our net zero pathway. So for us to live to the common good, don't worry, we don't need to continue to invest in fossil fuels, because we have so many awesome other alternatives now that can get us there. Pope Francis, again, released this document, Laudato Deum. I know I've talked about it a lot. It's the name of our org. 10 years ago. A year and a half ago, he released an update, which is not normal for a pope to do, called Laudate Deum, which was basically saying, hey, y'all, you didn't hear me. You got to do it. And he says, I fear that we are now at the brink of the collapse. We're at a breaking point. It's time to take this seriously and make a big difference. And he explicitly says that the necessary transition towards clean energy sources and the abandonment of fossil fuels is not progressing at the necessary speed. So he calls it out explicitly from the Vatican, right? And calls us towards this. He even gathered oil and gas companies to try and bring them around to say, like, can we start to shift this transition, and called them towards change as well. So what do we know? Those on the margins are being hit first and worst. We're all feeling it now, and they're feeling it much more. Cities across the country will have just incredibly horrific impacts. And we know that young people are really concerned about it. I think we can see it across Gonzaga with the amazing movement that you're building around this as well, and that we see moving across the country. The University of Bath did a study of 10,000 youth aged 16 to 25 across 10 countries on the climate crisis, and 75% said the future is frightening. And 55.7%, over half, said humanity is doomed. This should be like a wake-up call to us as Catholics. Because we believe, just this week is Holy Week. We believe in a Lord who died and came back to life. So if we talk about what does doom mean and what does hope mean, we hold a certain element of ability to speak of morality, of truth here, that is really powerful. And so we can say that divesting from fossil fuels is in fact living out Jesus' mission statement, which is in Luke. Cardinal Tobin spoke to this history. He's in Newark. He says, the faith community, with its vast reach and moral authority, has a pivotal role to play in engendering the kind of change we need to see. When our children and grandchildren look back at this moment, they will judge us by our actions and decisions. As people of faith, we must rise to the occasion, ensuring that our legacy is one of unity, pursuing shared prosperity and equality, and unwavering commitment to the preservation of our common home. So, I think it brings us to the question that I continue to sit with, that is around, if we are educating young people to be leaders in this world, then why are we also destroying that world that we are educating young leaders to be working within? So in Laudato Si, again, Pope Francis says, speak of the 200-year present, and he poses these questions. What is the purpose of our life in this world? Why are we here? What is the goal of our work and all of our efforts? And what need does the earth have of us? It is no longer enough then simply to state that we should be concerned for future generations. We need to see that what is at stake is our own dignity. Leaving an inhabitable planet to future generations is, first and foremost, up to us. So thank you very much for your time and attention this evening. And I'm excited to continue the conversation with questions and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I would love, as we typically do, to invite students to ask maybe the first questions, and I'm tempted to come over here to some of the students of Fossil Free, just in case one of you feels compelled / bullied into asking a question. Leah, I'm looking at you. Yeah, you knew it was coming.
Hi, my name is Leah, and I'm one of the members of Fossil Free Gonzaga advocating for divestment here at Gonzaga. And so we are so grateful for you to be here to bring public awareness to this event and to give us some advice on our movement here on campus. We, as a club, have definitely brainstormed a few questions for you, which we reached out with. I think one of the questions that I have that specifically relates to the financial aspect is that we've received arguments that, which you touched on a little bit, that selling off our stocks in the fossil fuel industry simply gives other investors a chance to buy low. And if all of these Catholic universities and institutions sell off their stocks in order to divest from fossil fuels, then we have tons and tons of fossil fuel stocks out there that give people the opportunity to make a profit off of them. How would you respond to that argument that we're helping out the fossil fuel industry because of this mass movement of investments?
Thank you for asking that question. Yeah, so I think this is where we are uniquely situated as Catholic institutions. We can lean into this morality piece of the puzzle, right? So while that will be true for a while, that there will be buyers, eventually, the earth will continue to, have disasters at an increasing rate and increasing intensity. So there will be decreasing interest in this. So again, back to that stranded asset thing. But it helps to be in front of the curve on that and say that there is even more than that. There is a moral cause to this. There is the fact that we believe in creating a sustainable world. Our faith calls us to say that everyone deserves the right to live and have enough food and have safety and security, right? And so the moral space here and that social license is huge, and we have a very unique ability to help remove that social license faster than sort of the general public because we are Catholic.
Others? Anybody have a question for Anna Johnson?
I love it. I just spoke so clearly that you are I know exactly what it is. I'm curious from all of you, sorry to jump in front, Dr. Henning, but I'm curious from all of you, what's the most motivating piece of this, right? I kind of laid out a bunch of arguments. What part of it is most motivating to you?
Well, the people online won't be able to hear you. Can you have...
Yeah, so for me, I'm really fascinated by the responsibility that we have as you talked about the global north. So much more of what we have around here is far more developed, far more carbon emitting than what we see in the global south. Your piece on Uganda was really impactful for me because I wanted to do Peace Corps. I didn't end up going, I didn't get the chance, but I really see this as a really important thing where we see the responsibility on us as highly developed nations up here to do our part and really make an impact where we can. For me personally, I would like to go into policy around housing and transportation, local policy, and trying to make an impact in that front as far as how can we make it sustainable, how can we make cities more dense, how can we have less of an impact on our environment. And so for me, that really stood out. How can we, as a global north, really contribute and make an impact? Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Who else? What's most motivating about this call to divestment?
I just want to say thank you, but I don't think we know the power of people. And I think this taps into our own power, especially when I was struck by the fact that there's so many institutions that are doing this, that are considering doing this, and that's a power right there. I think, back at the civil rights, it was the power of the people that made that happen. The women's movement, it's the power of the people. So I think we have to take this as a gift that's been given to us.
Amen. Thank you.
I think that might be a nice place to end. If I'm going to go back over to our Fossil Free Gonzaga students. And so if there were people who were interested in knowing more or participating, if they're a student here at Gonzaga, how would they participate and contribute? Who wants to take it? All right.
I mean, I think just get in contact with us. We have email lists that you can follow along with. We have a website, we have an Instagram page, and we host a lot of different community events that many of which you would all be welcome to come to, whether you're a student here, faculty member, any community member. And we're constantly looking to make more partnerships around the community. So if you are involved in a different organization, or if you have ties to other organizations that are invested in this work, however you see it connecting, we would love to get in contact with you just to build our own movement here. Fossil Free Gonzaga. Oh, yes. Sorry, yes. Our Fossil Free Gonzaga. Yes, you can find us, on Instagram with that name.
Yeah, also going off that really quick, I think a couple of the members of Fossil Free Gonzaga will be sticking around after, and we have a table outside with different QR codes and more information, and we're all happy to talk to everybody right after this as well.
All right. Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for speaking with us. I'm a professor of religious studies here at Gonzaga, and so I really appreciate this. Your question, okay, what is the argument that sort of stands out to us, right, as maybe most meaningful? And so for me, it's the moral argument, right? Although I appreciate all the, about the finance and everything else. And when I think about, the argument for divestment and the moral reasons for it, for me, I can't escape the idea that we need to come up with a way to speak about what a flourishing life is outside of consumption frameworks, right? I mean, we should divest from fossil fuels, right? And at the same time, we should do that because there's a crisis, right, in terms of like what we think a good life is about, right? Is it about being more sustainable, less sustainable, right? Consuming more or less. I think we have to think beyond those categories. And so your organization, the Laudato Si movement, does a lot more than just this. And so here's my question, I guess, is like, could you maybe talk to us a little bit more about that organization and how it goes about mobilizing Catholics and maybe even just those who are looking for sort of faith-based, moral-based reasons to engage in action like this? What are some of the what's some of the work you do to speak to people's hearts as well as their minds?
Great question. Yes. So Laudate Deum movement, our mission statement is to mobilize the world's 1.3 billion Catholics and all people of goodwill to care for our common home and achieve ecological justice. And so it covers a lot of areas of this. An essential part of our movement is that we are a movement. And so one of the main things that we do is work with others to build community. We will not get there alone, right? Like we started this. Pope Francis says no one will be saved alone. This is not something that any one of us in our brilliance will be able to find all the answers to. We need the solutions coming from Texas and coming from renewable energy exploration. And we need the answers coming from teachers talking to their students and following through in other ways. And that we will do that through coming together in community. Right now, particularly in the global north, we're seeing an increased isolation, and isolationism moving towards people where it's hard work to be in community. It's not easy, right? We read the Acts of the Apostles. Maybe you don't, I do. Reading the Acts of the Apostles, right? And what happened after Jesus died and came back to life and then left again is like the apostles had to come together, and it says they shared everything they had in common. They worked together, right? So that we don't all, in a neighborhood, do we all need to have a weed whacker? Or can we just share one? Can we have, these alternative forms of economy like Opal spoke about when he was here, that's like, how are we sharing together that which we're called to have, right? And how are we making sure that we're engaging in that sense of community, because if we understand we belong to each other, then it's going to shift automatically how I view how I'm showing up in spaces. So we do a lot to just help build communities. We organize through what we call Laudato Si circles, so small communities in a hyper-local way. People can come together around prayer, reflection, and action. We do chapters, and most places around the world have countrywide chapters to say, how are people, Catholics and people of goodwill, coming together to work from the lens of faith, not from a lens of partisanship, not from a lens of other rationale, but from the lens of our faith being our core driver of what drives us towards action to move towards caring for our common home. In the United States, we have statewide chapters, so we just launched our Washington State chapter last month, actually, and so you're welcome to join it. We would love to have you join us as we continue to explore what we can do as Catholics in Washington State to help transform the dialogue that's happening in our governmental level, the dialogue that's happening in so many other spaces, to say that there is a call for morality to show up, and there is a call for us to be witnesses to what we believe of God's love in the secular space. And how do we do that in a really positive way, relying upon the strengths that everyone has. So thank you very much for that question.
Thank you so much. Let's thank Anna one more time. And please do join some of the students outside at the table to learn more and to support their work. And hopefully we will not be here 10 years from now celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Fossil-Free Gonzaga movement. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next week, Tuesday at 6 o'clock here or online for Graduating in an Age of Climate Crisis, our last event of the series this year. Hope to see you again soon.